Okay, our next speaker is also no stranger in the SAP development community and also not on events like UI5 Con. So he came all the way to Belgium with a session about TypeScript in UI5. Please welcome Helmut for the next session.
Yeah, thank you. Welcome to my session here, UI5 with TypeScript. I want to tell you how you can develop UI5 applications with TypeScript already now. We heard this morning in the keynote that they are working on TypeScript support, but it's already possible now, and I will show you how. That's a little bit about me. The most important sentence is the second one. I'm a freelancer and you can book me. And UI5 with TypeScript, you might say now that's not possible, and I tell you in a moment that it is possible already now. And then you might say, okay, TypeScript is more verbose than JavaScript. I don't want to write too much code. And I say, yes, it's a little bit more verbose than JavaScript, but editors, IDEs help you a lot, and you already get, and you also get a lot for this extra typing. Then you might ask, what is with all my JavaScript libraries I use? And I can tell you all libraries I use so far, and not almost all, but all libraries I use so far are perfectly or do perfectly fit into TypeScript. There are type definitions for them and on the internet. That's no problem. Can I use it in SAP Web IDE? No, you can't use it in SAP Web IDE, but who is still using SAP Web IDE for UI5 development? I don't do that for a long time now. And of course, it will run in the new application, Business Application Studio. So why should you use TypeScript, you might ask? You might say, I'm fine with JavaScript, or I don't want to learn another language, I don't have time to learn another language. If you are fine with JavaScript, stay with JavaScript. Don't move to TypeScript, even so it gives you much more options I come to in a moment. If you say, I don't want to learn another language, I would say, just find another job, because our job, software development, is learning every day. And if you say, I don't have time to learn another language, go to your boss and talk to him, because he didn't understand IT. So, what do you get with TypeScript? You get a lot more options with TypeScript, and this graphic or this picture shows you, the yellow circle shows you what's available with JavaScript today, for example, ES5. Then the next generations of JavaScript enhance the JavaScript language, and TypeScript sets something on top of it, and you get a lot more options, and that leads at least to better quality. You write programs, you write applications with much better quality. That's because you find errors not at runtime, but already at compile time, and even better, you find it while you are typing in your IDE. If you pass a wrong parameter to a function, the IDE will complain, or TypeScript and the IDE will complain. That leads to faster programming cycles. Yeah, lastly, because of the good IDE support, and also because you can use the newest language features. Then it enhances the maintainability of your programs, of your projects. It's easier for your colleagues to understand your code, because TypeScript is a sort of self-documenting, and it's even easier, or it's also easier to understand your code you wrote years ago. So I don't know how you feel with your code that you wrote years ago. I always get in trouble when I see my code and I have to understand it, and TypeScript helps you with that. And last not least, but not least, you will have more fun. And so we are developers, and developers are sort of kids, and we want to have fun when we are working. So what exactly is TypeScript? One question, who already worked with TypeScript? And who does it regularly? So yeah, okay, some of you. So TypeScript is a typed superset, that's the definition. TypeScript is a typed superset on JavaScript that compiles to plain JavaScript. So TypeScript is JavaScript, but there's something on top of it. And TypeScript is a typed language like other languages like Java, C++, C#, but it's even cooler than other languages, other type languages, and I will show you why it is cooler. And TypeScript is developed and maintained by Microsoft, so there's a huge company behind this language, and we can expect that it will also live in 5 years and in 10 years. So it's not like, for example, CoffeeScript. I never worked with CoffeeScript, but I think CoffeeScript is a niche programming language, and TypeScript is used by already all major frameworks like React, Angular, Vue. They all adopted TypeScript. And as we heard this morning, UI5 is also working on it. The features you get with TypeScript. So the most important feature is the first one, in my opinion. So every line of JavaScript code is valid TypeScript code. So when you start, or when I started using TypeScript, I just renamed my JavaScript file into TS, from JS into TS, and I'd send it to the TypeScript compiler, and it worked perfectly. So you can move step by step from JavaScript to TypeScript. First, you may start with defining your variables in a TypeScript manner, in a typed manner. Then you might change some functions you wrote and move them to TypeScript, and in the end you have moved your complete modules and your complete program to TypeScript when you get more used to it. And TypeScript, the next point, TypeScript implements the newest JavaScript features similar to Bubble, but better, because it doesn't only support JavaScript, it sets something on top of it. TypeScript compiles to plain JavaScript, I already mentioned it, and TypeScript compiles even to ES3, so it's no problem to support older browsers. I regularly, for UI5 applications, I regularly use ES5, and I let TypeScript do the compiling to ES5, and I don't have to care about browser support. I just program in TypeScript. TypeScript can be installed via npm. That's, for me, it's also very important, because in these days we are all working with Node.js all the time and with npm, and so for me it's important that I can install it via npm, and that's possible with TypeScript. And TypeScript is open source, even though Microsoft is developing TypeScript, the language. It's also open source, so even if Microsoft might say in 10 years we don't like TypeScript anymore, we developed a new language, there will be companies, of course, who will fill that gap and develop the language. Yeah, they also have a web page. So why should you switch from JavaScript to a typed language? You all know JavaScript, and you may feel good with JavaScript, but why should you switch? First point is that TypeScript is self-documenting, or a sort of self-documenting. You don't have to write as much documentation as you have to for JavaScript, and we all do write a lot of documentation for our JavaScript code, I hope. But TypeScript is a bit self-documenting. I'll show you in a moment. TypeScript tells you or helps you find errors early. As I mentioned, TypeScript compiles to JavaScript and complains about errors while it's compiling, or it's called transpiling, while it transpiles to JavaScript. And through IDE support, the IDEs already remind you to the errors or show you the errors you have in your code. Then TypeScript helps you to call the right function with the right parameters. That leads to enhanced developer experience, because we have so much experience. I thought it would be good to have a developer experience also. Yeah, because TypeScript knows the structure of your program, knows the types of your program. It can help you via the IDEs to offer you IntelliSense, inline help in the editor, and such things which you might know from other programming language like Java, or I think ABAP has it too. TypeScript can refactor your code. That's a huge benefit you get with TypeScript. When I change a variable name or a property name in my JavaScript code, I always had trouble, and I thought, did you change it in all places where you are using it? And that's no problem with TypeScript, because TypeScript knows your types, and TypeScript does it for you, or the IDE does it for you. And if you don't work with an IDE that does it for you, you get compile time errors, and it says there's a problem. I don't know this variable. Then, the dev tools, the development tools for TypeScript are great. I mostly work with Visual Studio Code in my TypeScript applications, but it also works great with other IDEs, and I even managed to install a TypeScript extension in Vim, and that's also working great. Basics of TypeScript. I don't want to go into too much detail, and because I don't have time to, but TypeScript is a typed language, and so you define your variables with types. You say of which type your variable is. And here in the first line, for example, we have a variable is done that is of type Boolean with the colon and the type you define of which type it is. And of course, TypeScript has a number of built-in types like Boolean number, string, arrays. It has some types that are not known in the JavaScript world, like a tuple, that's a special sort of array. Then you have enums and other types also. Here to mention is generics. Generics are very powerful and give you a lot of flexibility. You may know generics already from Java if you have done Java development. They are very powerful, yeah. So functions, TypeScript, you may think that you have to write classes and do everything in classes with TypeScript, because TypeScript is an object-oriented programming language. But that's not true. You can, of course, use functions in your TypeScript applications. And here I defined a TypeScript function that's called reverse. And you see that this reverse function expects a parameter word of type string, and it returns a string. So I declare at design time the signature of my function. And this can be used or is used by TypeScript, by the TypeScript compiler, and also by IDEs to help you. And here in the example, in the screenshot below, you see that this function I once call with here in the first place, I call it with a string and everything is fine. And when I call it with a Boolean, with a true value, the TypeScript compiler and the IDE complain about the error. They say, yeah, that true is not of type string. And with TypeScript, you also can have optional and read-only parameters. That's also possible, yeah. And then you have the possibility, or you have the language feature called interfaces and classes. Classes are also available with ES6, JavaScript ES6. TypeScript had it built into the language from the beginning on. Yeah, but let's start with the interfaces. Interfaces in TypeScript are just a collection of properties, of attributes. Here, for example, I defined an interface person that has the property or the attributes name of type string and age of type number. And this age property, for example, is an optional property because I added the question mark before the colon. And then I can use such interfaces in my function signatures. So here I used it as a parameter to the function. I expect a person parameter. I could also use it as a return value. And I can pass the interfaces around my application. Then there are classes, like in other object-oriented programming languages. You can define classes. Here I have a greeter class with a greeting property or attribute, with a constructor, and with a greet method. And the greet method returns a message where it uses the greeting attribute or the greeting property of the class. And then I can instantiate such classes via the new keyword in the language. And after that, I have the greeter variable to which I can apply, or which I can call, for which I can call the methods of the class. Here in the bottom, you see a thing you don't have to define in TypeScript. You don't have to define types for everything. TypeScript is intelligent enough that it infers types of your programs. And for example, here the birth year function doesn't return, or I haven't defined a return value or a return type for this function, but TypeScript and the IDE still know that it returns a number, because it inspects your code and has a look. Has a look at the return value and knows that in this case it's a number. Then now I would have liked to show you a demo in TypeScript, but because of time issues I will not do that. Come to me later after this session if you want to talk more about TypeScript. We now go into the UI5 programming with TypeScript, and you have to keep a few things in mind when you do UI5 development with TypeScript. The first thing is configuration, and I first have to mention this npm package. I already opened it. Where is my screen? Hello? Here. just want to show you I wanted to show you, but I don't get it now. Yes, here we are. So I wanted to show you this NPM package that's developed by the UI5 team. It delivers, or it offers you all the TypeScript definitions for the UI5 open or for the open UI5 libraries. And when I saw this on the internet, I decided to develop my applications with TypeScript. So you should have a look if you are interested in TypeScript development with UI5. You should definitely have a look at it, and you have to be able to use this. You have to install it as a development, as a dev dependency into your UI5 application. I did it here in my package JSON, and I integrated as a development dependency. Then the next point of configuration is TypeScript. Is a TypeScript config. With every TypeScript application you develop, you should deliver, or you should create a TypeScript configuration, a tsconfig JSON, in which you tell the TypeScript compiler the configuration of your project. And for UI5 projects, you have to set a few properties in this configuration file. The first one is the module. The module has to be set to none, because TypeScript out of the box supports AMD module system and CommonJS module system. CommonJS module system is used by Node.js. AMD is used by, for example, ES6, Angular, React, and so on. UI5 uses its own module system. It's AMD-like, but it is not AMD. And so you have to set the module type to none here. Then you define the target. I always use ES6 for UI5 development. The source map property is, for me, is very important, because through the source maps I'm able to develop my TypeScript applications in the debugger, and not the generated JavaScript files. The generated JavaScript files are sometimes a little bit unreadable or hard to read, and therefore it's easier to develop really what you programmed. And you programmed your TypeScript files, your TypeScript code. Then there's the types property that has to be set. Normally, TypeScript looks into the Node module system. There's a subfolder called types, and in this subfolder, the type definitions for TypeScript are located. This OpenUI5 plugin installs these type definitions into the OpenUI5 TS types folder, and therefore you have to tell TypeScript, have a look into this folder for the UI5 types. And then you have to tell TypeScript which files you want to include into your project, and of course you want to include everything that's beneath the web app folder. But also, that's what I'm always doing. I also define a folder named typings, and I show you in a moment what I put into this typings folder. But this is also in, if you follow my project template here, which is available at GitHub already. You should define a typings folder and fill it with a file I'll show you. Then the TypeScript coding. So that was configuration is finished. Now we come to TypeScript coding. There are mainly two things you have to do, or three things you have to do in your coding. The first thing is when you define your SAP UI5 module with SAP UI5 define, you pass the components you want to use to this callback function, and here you tell TypeScript of what type these components are. For example, this JSON model is of type SAP UI model JSON model. That's the first thing, and the next thing is, because we are using TypeScript, I want to use object-oriented. I define classes in my coding, in my component controller component here, for example. I define a class that extends the UI component that's coming from the UI libraries, UI5 libraries, and then I create a constructor. And this is something you have to do. I debugged the UI5 code and had a look at what they do, and I figured out that I have to extend the component I'm based on here, pass the metadata information, and then assign this get metadata function of this function to the prototype of my component class. And this did the work for me. This was sufficient for me to develop in TypeScript, to develop my applications in TypeScript. And here I can just call the base class constructor via the super keyword. Yeah, that's all. Here is the same for a view controller. Again, SAP UI define as usual. Then you define with the TypeScript with the type of keyword. You tell TypeScript of which type your components you are using are. Here, for example, it's a base controller in my own namespace. And here again, we have the class, main class in this case, extends my base controller. The constructor calls the extend method and sets the get metadata function to this component. And now we come to the typings folder. Of course, UI5 is using its own type system. TypeScript cannot inspect your code and can pull the types of your components, of your modules, because it doesn't know how to handle the UI5 components. And therefore, you have to tell TypeScript which components, which types your application uses. And you're doing that you do that in an application, in a file that is normally called .d.ts. That's definition TypeScript for TypeScript. I called this file in this project UHD app. I'll show you in a moment which application I developed here. And firstly I declare a namespace, DE, then Tammen IT, that's my company name, and then the application name. And here I declare the signatures of my components and my methods and my functions I used throughout the application. Here, for example, I define the component that extends the UI component. It has a few methods with, for example, get user list, get user data here. With the parameters they expect and the return values, and of course some documentation, because a good programmer documents what he is doing, and so I wrote the documentation here. Here is the same for the view controller. or for the controllers. Here I defined my base controller, and the base controller, for example, has a method that is called getOwnerAppComponent that is not more than just a cast on the UI5 getOwnerComponent method, and it casts it to my individual component type. Additionally, I have a namespace data in my applications, and in this namespace data I define my own data, my business data I'm working with inside my applications. So I can use these types also in my application, and TypeScript supports it. Okay, enough theory. Let's go into the development. So this is my project. Here is the project. When you download the GitHub repository, you get these 3 folders here with the presentation, a little bit of a TypeScript sandbox, and this UI5 project. And before I do this, I show you the application so that you have an idea of what this application does. It's just a simple application for a user help desk I wrote for a customer. The user help desk agent is able to enter user ID or username here, select the user, and then gets information about the user, where of course, users often call the user help desk and say, I can't access this application, and I don't have access to this application. And then the user help desk user can have a look. Is this guy already registered? In this case, he is not, because he's not active in LDAP, and the user help desk agent can say, okay, it's not possible because your registration has not finished yet. That's the idea of this application. There are roles and requests and some personal user information. Very simple application, and that's the reason I chose it for this presentation. And yeah, let's come to the programming. As I already mentioned, the tsconfig, I did module none. I defined the types and everything I mentioned in this in my previous slide. Then in the package JSON, I defined the def dependency. And now let's come to the coding. At the beginning of my code, you see the sub UI define, and here the type of. And here I define the component class with the constructor, and again, the important thing, assign the get metadata method of the extend function to your component. So, and then you can develop TypeScript code here. This is a TypeScript function in it, and let's go to here to the bottom. Here I call the backend. That's just TypeScript. I define the parameters with the types, the return values. And I want to have a look at the main controller now with you. Here again, here's the same sub UI define type of my class, my constructor. And let's go to the bottom here, and I will now delete this line. And as I do it, you already see that TypeScript complains that there is an error, and TypeScript says, hey, I don't know this variable you are using here. And so let's just define the variable. So for example, await, and then this. And now you already see when I type this dot, you already see that I get suggestions made by TypeScript and the IDE, and I can select the methods that I can call on this type. Course I'm in a view controller which extends from my base controller. It offers all the methods the UI5 team defined in their UI, in their view controller, but also the methods I defined in my base controller. And the get owner app component, for example, is such a method I defined. You see it here in the signature. You see it's coming from my base controller called get owner app component. Here is the documentation, and I just want to use this method. And when I now type the next dot, I again get the suggestions of all the methods I can call on this type. This is the type of my controller, my view controller, which is inherited from base controller, not controller, my component, my component class. And yeah, it's inherited from UI component, and this component class I showed you in the slide earlier, for example, has these two methods, get user data and get user list. And again, the IDE via TypeScript shows me the signature of the method, shows me the documentation. That's all inline. You normally don't get with JavaScript functions. You always have to switch between browser documentation and your IDE, and you can have this all in your IDE here. So I select the get user data function, because that's what I want to use. And now you see TypeScript again complains. It says, okay, I have expected one argument but got 0. An argument for user ID was not provided. That's right. And at this point, I want to show you another feature that's coming with the IDE, with Visual Studio Code. It has a problems view, and in this problems view you also get all the errors that occur in your complete projects. This project is very small. It just has 2 files, basically 2 or 3 files. But if you have larger projects, it's helpful to have a list of errors and to see where you have problems and where you have to do some work. Okay, let's now fix the problem, and I pass a parameter of type string, and it's fine now. And yeah, now I could you already seen the application. That's that's basically all I wanted to show you. So you see, it's possible to write TypeScript applications with, or to write UI5 applications with TypeScript. And I would like to encourage you to make a little bit more community pressure on our UI5 team to support TypeScript a little bit better, or much better. Would be great. So thank you very much for your attention. Yeah, Volker. Yeah, that's easier. That's possible as soon as the UI5 team supports TypeScript. But at the moment, TypeScript cannot look into your code and inspect your code and cannot look which methods did Volker create and which documentation did he write. And that has to be done by the UI5 team. Either they move to a real AMD module system, or they write an add-on for TypeScript that TypeScript supports UI5, the UI5 module system. At the moment, you have to write this definition, type definition files in the typings folder. Yeah, that's a little bit cumbersome because you have to do, a lot of copy paste. I always write it in my component controller in my TypeScript code and copy paste it then to the typings file.
I have an idea for that. Let's sit together at lunch or so, and then I'll show you.
About your middleware.
No.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. Any more questions? No question? Yeah. Again, thank you, and hope you all will use TypeScript, because it's really cool. This is just a small or was just a small introduction. But currently I'm doing a Node.js project with TypeScript, and I would have been lost without TypeScript, because the project is currently has grown and to a huge project, and I would have been lost without TypeScript, without the type information inside my code. Yeah. Okay.